Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today. I appreciate you guys taking some time out from your lunch break. My name is Mike Johnson. I am the Director of Communities here at Mass TLC, and I run our talent community. So a topic that has been brought up to us is sort of the rise of the contingent workers and the contract employees, and also what sort of falls in with a lot of this discussion are interns and how they um, sort of fall into that category of contingent workers. And there's a lot of new rules and regulations about it. So we decided to put together a panel of experts and have a discussion about it. So we'd like to thank our sponsors for our talent community, which are Managed Staffing and Insperity. They are great partners of ours. And from there, I'm going to hand it off to Judy Polachek from Polachek HR Law, and she is going to lead our discussion today.
Welcome, everyone. I've been really looking forward to this conversation for a long time because I think this is one of the most important topics that we have in our talent and human resources field right now. And it's really nice to be able to take off a brief time in the middle of the day to consider the shift that we have all been through from a world where more of the workers that were providing services to companies were employees, had that traditional employment relationship, to a world where many companies are getting their work done using a hybrid workforce, a combination of employees and contingent workers. That's a really fundamental shift to how work is getting done. And we wanted to take time today to make sure we're all up to speed on what that means, what world we're in right now with the hybrid workforce, and then also to think ahead so that we in our field can try to stay on the forefront of managing this hybrid workforce and make sure that we're not in situations where we're always trying to catch up in our understanding of the new combination or hybrid workforce. So as a first step, I'm hoping this is obvious to everybody, but I thought let's get on the same page and just quickly say, who is a contingent worker? Who are these contingent workers we're talking about? And the answer is contingent workers are anybody who's not an employee. There are lots of names for the types of contingent workers that your companies are probably using. But most of them don't have so much legal significance, actually. The most weighty, significant relationships are employment relationships, and any relationship that a company might have with a worker that's not employment is simply non-employment, and that's who we're talking about when we're talking about contingent workers. I'm going to just interrupt for one moment to say if any of you are having trouble hearing or understanding me and want me to talk more slowly or more quickly, or having any technical issues, please go ahead and sort of flag those, because Mike is monitoring our conversation, and if there's anything that's getting in the way of you all understanding or participating, he should know and he can resolve it. And similarly, if you have questions or things you want us to talk about during the course of this talk, please also flag those for Mike. We are very happy to be interrupted. These are some complicated issues, and we want to make sure that you get access to the information in a way that's useful to you. It doesn't have to be in the order that we've prepared them. So you'll see, if you're watching our slides, that we wanted to, again, place ourselves in this moment where there has been a rise in the contingent workforce, an increase across the globe. Companies are getting more work done by contingent workers than they used to. So we're going to take a minute in this slide to talk about why that is. What are the drivers for that change? Because understanding why we're in this moment can help us understand how to manage the contingent workers along with the employees. And so I'm going to invite Kim and Aoife to tell us.
Hi, can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I can
You
hear
can.
you well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I just wanted to make sure. So my name is Ifo O'Mara. I work for Demandware. I apologize. I was a little late getting on this call. We actually just found out this morning that we're being acquired by Salesforce. So our whole world as far as contingent workforce is going to change, but I'm happy to give some insight as to what we are doing at this time. So one of the topics I was asked to cover was worker preference. So one of the issues that we have here is that, it's so funny because this is the example, we need Salesforce contractors all the time. And so they just make more money by contracting. So they don't want to work here full time. So that was one of the struggles that we had was, we desperately needed Salesforce contractors and, certain architects or solution architects and things of that nature that are really hard to find. And we want them to be full-time employees, but they don't want to be full-time employees. They like the flexibility of working from their home or working when they want to. A lot of them will take summers off and things of that nature because they're compensated so highly that they're able to do that. So those were some of the areas that we struggled with from a hiring perspective is that we need them so badly, but their working lifestyle is very different. So, we have to hire them on a contingent basis.
Hi, my name is Kim Castalda, and I work at Bullhorn. And we use contingent workers in a variety of ways. But one of the ways that I thought would be interesting to discuss today was we use contingent workers on a global scale, meaning that when we go into a new territory, what we'll do is hire a contractor to work in a specific location while we determine whether or not there's a business need or a market that is interested in our software. So, for example, I have an employee, right? I have a contingent worker right now working in Singapore for us, and I'm using a global agency to payroll that person because we don't have the ability as a company to employ this individual in Singapore. We've done the same thing in the Netherlands previous to hiring those employees. So it gives us an opportunity to go into a new space or a new area of the globe without making the investment in a permanent employee that may or may not be able to work effectively in a particular region. So that's been something that's been really interesting to us. And we've also had to use contingent workers
I'm
when
so
we
sorry to
can't
interrupt you,
hire
Kim,
fast
but I
enough and
can't,
bring
I
on
didn't
contractors
understand.
effective if we.
For a moment there, I didn't hear you. I'm wondering
Okay,
if,
I didn't hear what.
I'm sorry to interrupt. If you could speak slowly because your voice is coming in and out.
Are we having some? Okay. So I will go with the practical constraints, which is that we can't hire people fast enough, and oftentimes we'll use contractors to augment our existing teams. We've brought on contract recruiters at times. We've brought on interns to help us during the summer months, specifically to help us with some data needs, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll use contingents to augment our existing workforce when we're not able to hire fast enough or have a long-term need for these individuals.
I think there are changes in technology that have also exploded the use of and awareness of the contingent workforce in the general public's knowledge. We in our field, in the talent field, had enough that was changing to make the contingent workforce an important topic for us. But what I'm noticing is that now that there are online labor markets who provide intermediary services between companies and workers, and now that there are apps like Uber that, or Lyft, or any number of other ones that bring together workers and the people who want to use their services, the whole issue of non-employees providing services has become top of mind to people who are not in our field and have nothing to do with human resource as in talent management normally, because fundamentally using Uber drivers or using an online labor market to get a project done is a new format for the workforce, and it's caused a lot of consternation among so many people because it doesn't easily fit into the category of employment, and it doesn't easily fit into the traditional independent contractor category either. And so as a result, there's a lot of public interest in the contingent workforce that I think we've never seen before. I think technology has brought it into a broad, it made more people interested than would otherwise have been interested in it outside of our field. I want to make sure everyone can still hear because I've just lost vision. I can't see the other folks. Oh, good, we're still here. So at this moment, if you have questions, please submit them so Mike can communicate them to us. But in the meantime, I'll jump ahead with the background information that we wanted to share about why this even matters, why this distinction between employees and non-employees even matters. Again, it might be second nature to a lot of you, but for those of you who it isn't, or for those of you who want a little context for it, I'm going to give a brief background on the legal requirements and the legal implications of the employment status and the non-employment status. Fundamentally, the whole reason we have the employee definition or the employee category is to provide protections for workers. And so much of what we do in our field is make sure that companies don't trample on the rights of the workers. And the way we do it is by following the employment laws. And the employees are always trying to make sure they get what they're owed under the employment laws because the employment laws guarantee them some benefits. So for instance, employees are entitled to unemployment benefits through the state unemployment benefit systems and to workers' comp insurance, obviously. They have access to tax preferential retirement plans and to group health insurance that they wouldn't otherwise have if they weren't employees. They have many laws, obviously, giving them protections from mistreatment or bad treatment by a company. Bad treatment in the context of discrimination, or bad treatment in the context of making them work too long hours for too little pay. All those protections that guarantee minimum wage, overtime, some time off, and guarantee them the right to band together and bargain collectively about their terms and conditions, all of those rights and benefits are created by laws, created by legislation over the years that people have decided is necessary to protect workers. But in most cases, those laws protect only employees, only people who are doing the work within the relationship of employment. That's kind of the whole point. I'm guessing that a lot of you have encountered questions about how to decide who's an employee and who's a contingent worker or an independent contractor. And again, that's defined by the law. It's ultimately, it can be really confusing to figure out whether an individual worker is an independent contractor or an employee if you're going to properly follow the law. Mostly because each one of those laws that protect employees have different definitions and different tests to determine who's an employee and who's entitled to protections of that law. So it's enough to drive anyone nuts. And it's the reason why ultimately when we're deciding who to classify as an employee, it is best to get legal advice, because in many cases it's not obvious and you have to look carefully at the definitions of the laws you're applying. But I don't want to leave it completely opaque at this moment, so I did want to tell you again, for those of you who don't know, and I do understand that there are many out there who are probably very sophisticated about this knowledge, but I want to make sure we're at least all up to speed on some of the basics. I want to tell you that the basic idea of who's an employee is that an employee is an individual who's providing some services to an employer, a company, or it even could be services to an individual, when the entity that's receiving the work has some control, some right to direct and control the work that the individual is doing. And then also probably has a bunch of other things in that work relationship that make it look more like employment. And the types of things you look at to determine whether you've got enough weighing towards the employee side, in addition to who's controlling the work, is the work an integral part of the business? Who's making the investment in the tools and the equipment and the background necessary to get the work done? Who's got an opportunity to earn a profit, or who might suffer a loss from the work? Does the worker need to have a specialized skill to provide the work, and how long is that relationship going to last? If it's a short relationship, it might be a little more likely that they can be properly classified as an independent contractor. But if the relationship is likely to be a little longer, it certainly is going to look more like employment. Here in Massachusetts, and I'll specify this because we are in Massachusetts, there is a very, very rigid definition of employee. And because of this, there are very few workers out there who can really legitimately be classified as non-employees. And the reason is because in Massachusetts, pretty much anybody who's doing work that is an integral part of the business or in the regular course of the business, they're probably an employee under the Massachusetts law anyway. So that's a brief rundown on the law. I'd be happy to go into detail if anybody wants more details. And I think the best resource that you can all refer to if you want more information is a Department of Labor guidance that they issued last summer in July of 2015. Because of the rise of the contingent workforce, the federal government is very interested in making sure that workers who are entitled to the benefits of employment receive all those benefits. So they issued a guidance instructing us more in an updated way on who's an employee and who's not an employee under the law. Lastly, I wanted to let you know that really the change in the workforce that I talked about at the beginning is probably going to make some changes here too in the legal requirements for employees and non-employees. In many other countries, there are other categories besides employee and non-employee. In the UK, they have a classification called worker that is meant for workers who have not all of the indicia of employment, but the legislators there have decided that workers are entitled to some protections. And in Canada and Germany also, there's a category called dependent contractor, which again is sort of in between. You get some protections, but not all employment protections. Co-employment, I would be happy to go into, but I hesitate to go into it now because I don't want to take up all our time with legal requirements. But I do, before we move on, want to flag the whole notion that I'm predicting that we're going to see changes in how these definitions play out in an ad hoc way. That despite the fact that there are a lot of scholars and a lot of advocates for workers advocating for creating new worker classifications to accommodate something in between an employee and a non-employee, it's hard to imagine that that type of legislation could be passed in the near future. Instead, what we're actually seeing, what we've seen this spring, is that that the contingent workforce might be gaining some rights simply by private interactions between a private company and private workers. And the example I want to toss out is Uber. There were a number of Uber workers that sued using a class action to try to get some of those employment protections. They feel like they were misclassified as independent contractors and felt like they were employees and should get those protections. And the lawsuit was settled very recently, and the settlement is a private agreement between these Uber drivers and Uber, whereby Uber did agree to give them some minimal protections that look a little bit like employment protections, but nothing as significant as the workers would have been entitled to if they had won their lawsuit and gotten full employment protection. And the example that I think is most telling is that the Uber drivers in their settlement with Uber got the right to form a worker guild, and Uber agreed that they will periodically meet with that guild and listen to what the Uber drivers have to say and take in those workers' collective voice about their rights and what they want from Uber. And that looks a lot like the worker unionizing rights, the collective action rights that an employee has. So it will be very interesting if we have another one of these conversations a year from now to see whether through private settlements and private negotiations, workers and contingent workers and the companies for whom they work start carving out some in-between status to keep everybody happy. But we can worry about that next year. Right now, we'd like next to talk about the different rules that companies actually have and need to have currently for employees and for independent contractors. How are companies treating them differently?
Do you want me to dive in first?
Please do.
Okay, so Demandware actually has a rule for all contractors, including interns, because they do fall under that category, although they're not nearly as risky as hiring contractors, that we are only allowed to have them for 1 year. And after 1 year, they have to choose, or we have to choose if we have a full-time spot for them, or if, and there's a way to convert them, or if they need to move on to their next assignment. And that's something that's really important to us, just to protect, you know, our full-time employees and ourselves from lawsuits in the future.
So I want to talk about workplace culture and events and how we manage all of these different individuals walking around our companies. At Bullhorn, we have to choose all of our interns, contractors, consultants, everybody as everyone is responsible for understanding and following our code of conduct, participating in our workplace culture. In exchange for that sort of corporate citizenship, we treat all of the people here as similar to our employees, meaning that they don't get the same benefits in terms of health, dental, medical, vision, but they are included in any of our summer outings, our holiday parties, any type of fun thing or that going on at the company. They are invited and encouraged to participate and therefore paid for their time to participate in some of these events that are happening during business hours. Things that happen outside of business hours, of course, they are not compensated for, but we do have a number of events in which our consultants and contractors attend, and we're paying for them to be there even though they're not working per se, but interacting with the rest of our employees. And that's really important to us and to the culture that we're trying to cultivate here.
And I have to agree that as far as workplace culture and events, we definitely do the same thing within that year of employment as well. And then I can dive in as far as access to information. So at Demandware, we onboard all contractors the exact same way as we onboard a full-time employee, minus the fact that they don't get our benefits. So they come in on day one, they attend our onboarding session, we have them go back to their seat at the time that we go over full-time benefits. But everything else is the same. So they get an IT orientation, they get access, they get a computer from IT, access to our exchange, which is our internal portal to see all the company events and the other things that are going on. You know, we do a full background check on every single employee that comes on site, and that is also the same for intern and contractors. And on top of that, they sign an agency NDA or they sign a 1099 NDA. We have NDAs specific to what type of contractor that they are, and they fill out, you know, basically anything protecting the company, anything they may see online, you know, to the outside world. So they sign everything just like a normal full-time employee would, minus the benefits.
Similar things, right? Also, we put them through, we have a security training that it goes through concerning access to our data, non-disclosure agreements they are asked to sign as well. They're not as strict, if you will, as our employee NDAs, obviously because of the nature of the transiency of their relationship with us, but they are still required to sign those NDAs.
I think those are really good examples of what different companies are doing, because what I am so often seeing is that that independent contractors or contingent workers are entering a company in a way that doesn't make it obvious that the company needs to protect the data that they're sharing with the worker, or the trade secrets that they're sharing with the worker. Sometimes they don't come into the company through regular channels, and so it's easy for a company to forget that they actually need to protect all of their data and trade secrets in those relationships in the same way they do with their employees. I think it often becomes more complicated if there's an intermediary in that relationship. So if a company is bringing in an independent contractor or a contingent worker through an agency or through a PEO or some intermediary, often it's difficult to remember, let alone figure out, who's going to have the worker sign that NDA, and what computer, for instance, is that worker going to use, and how is the company that ultimately is getting the benefit of the services, how is that company going to get access to the worker's computer if they need it? Because sometimes a contingent worker or an independent contractor is very invested in their status as independent, as an independent professional, and the notion that any contracting party would want to look at their computer to make sure they're using the data appropriately, or perhaps as part of some type of audit. Any notion of that kind of intrusion is very upsetting to them. So I think these can be tough issues. And another issue that I've seen that's interesting to think through is the attorney-client privilege. So more and more, I'm seeing contingent workers working on a temporary basis at a very high level of management for a company, an outsourced COO, a temporary CFO, a business consultant who engages with the management on very high-level business strategy issues. Often those type of people have reason to talk with the company's attorneys. And what I think people often aren't realizing is that sometimes those conversations are not protected by the attorney-client privilege if the representative of the company is not an employee, but rather an independent contractor or consultant or representative of a consulting agency. So that's one more rule or procedure that needs to be different for independent contractors. You really need to figure out, can they have a privileged conversation with a company attorney? And if not, how are we going to get a company's legal advice? How are we going to get legal advice for the company and keep it confidential if one of the high-level people that we want to work with the attorney can't have a confidential conversation with the attorney? So those are some issues that we're thinking of and how to manage the contingent workers. And what keeps coming up is this question of, is there an outside agency? Is there an inside department that's responsible for the contingent workforce? We're really curious to talk about who the point people are responsible for contingent workers, both external and internal.
I'm going to jump in here, and as I mentioned earlier, we have a contract worker for Bullhorn that is based in Singapore, and I actually have engaged a third party, and the organization is called CXC, in which we actually found the employee, found the contingent worker, although they will find them for us. And we've set up a 2-year arrangement in which this organization is basically going to payroll and administer any type of benefits or any type of programming that needs to happen in Singapore for this particular employee, for this particular contingent individual. We do, sort of as a company, consider him a employee of sorts, which is probably problematic, and Judy, you can let me know if it is, but he is actually payrolled for us through a third party that is helping basically keep us compliant in a country in which we have no internal human resources expertise. And that's been extremely beneficial to us in terms of managing sort of our growth in a region of the world that we do not have human resources support.
That actually, I obviously, can't give legal advice on a particular situation to your company, but what I think is interesting to mention in that context is another focus of the Department of Labor right now, the Federal Department of Labor. They're focused on the co-employment relationship, the fact that some workers might technically be the employee of one of those intermediary agencies, and everybody acknowledges that's necessary for exactly the reasons Kim has been discussing, but that there are situations where the company that ultimately is receiving the benefit of those services should not be permitted to dispense with all of their employer obligations, and so they are also an employer. We have both in the vertical model of co-employment when we have the intermediary entity, more commonly in a domestic environment where the ultimate company receiving the services might be considered the co-employer. And then there's also, the Department of Labor has also described a horizontal co-employment relationship, where, for instance, you have two branches of the same fast food restaurant, for instance, who are both using the services of a worker, and the DOL says, well, if there are enough connections between those two companies, they've got to, for instance, add up the hours that the worker works at both restaurants when they're determining whether or not the person's entitled to overtime. Those two fast food restaurants might be co-employers, because if they're permitted to separate out the hours, they're avoiding some kind of overtime responsibility. So it's just a term you're probably going to hear around and need to be aware of, that even when you're using intermediaries, you might be a co-employer of the ultimate worker.
I do have one thing to say about the external piece too. We actually have employees in, well, not employees, because we also contract them out in Shanghai. And so we have an issue with actually getting an entity within China at all. And so have you dealt with that with other companies? Because we try to manage everything internally, which is, I know, is the next slide, and I will definitely dive into that. But that's something we've actually really struggled with, and I'm sure other companies are as well. So could you dive in a little bit deeper about what other people are doing, or does the co-employment kind of also happen in China as well, due to the fact that it's so hard to set up an entity there?
Um, yeah, companies do need, I mean, China is one example of a country where you do need to find some kind of entity to work with if you're going to hire workers there. And I think it would be unusual to find under US law that you're co-employers with the Chinese entity if the workers are Chinese and employed by a Chinese entity. Although I certainly can't say that for certain and would have to look into it um, to see how the laws apply. But it's a good question.
Thank you. So I can dive next into the internal piece. So we try to manage our contractors internally on a global basis. So we have an HR manager in every country that we have an entity in, minus China, of course. And we are expanding Asia Pacific, which it just becomes increasingly harder to manage it internally over there. So for the most part, I would say that we do manage it internally. Every contractor throughout the US goes through me, and that goes for all of our offices. That's just so that we do treat them all the same. So I make sure that all the correct paperwork are filled out across the board, whether it's through an agency or they're 1099, or sometimes they actually want to be on our payroll too, which is a little dicey as far as the co-employment piece goes. We try to avoid that as much as possible. But in Europe, we have an HR manager who manages it out there as well. You can't do, obviously, the same background screens that we do in the US due to every country has their own laws. France, it's pretty much impossible to do the screens there. So we do the best that we can, and we try to keep it consistent across the board. But we do try to manage it internally as much as possible, just so that we do have control. Demandware has a platform that hosts credit card data, so our chief security officer finds it really important that he knows that a background check was done, that we have access to it in case anything did go wrong. We have that information. We're not relying on an outside party to come up with that for us.
Kim, would you like to add anything from your experience here?
Actually, it's a little bit more dicey for us than for Eva. So our hiring managers who have especially project work tend to be the people who are managing their contractors locally. So they'll have a budget that they are responsible for. I know of these folks who are working in the building because we have to provide them with access, et cetera, et cetera. And as I mentioned, we do invite them to a variety of trainings and pieces along those lines. However, their sort of exit from the company tends to be driven by financial, meaning that a project will run out of money or have ended, and then that individual is leaving. So it's a little, it's sort of all over the place, I have to say.
I think that's the norm. My impression is that it's the norm that things are all over the place, which is, again, what I wanted to bring it back around to close up and provide everybody with some advice, because it is very hard when it's all over the map, and I think it's worth trying to design some kind of unifying workforce strategy that will allow a company to intelligently manage all of the workforce, whatever their classifications. I think it's good for business. And I think it's also good to keep those of us in the HR and talent field relevant, because the more we are not involved with the contingent worker relationships, the more we're only helping the company with a real small piece of its workforce issues, and the more fundamentally we're marginalized. So to be most helpful to the company, and I think for the company to run most effectively, it's worth trying to have some type of unified workforce strategy. We don't have any magic bullets that we came up with here to give you, and I wish that we did. But at this point, I thought we would just jump to 6 basic principles that we think will help guide you as you try to either pull together your workforce management strategies or design a new one. The first steps are the top and the bottom blocks: transparency and proper classification. The only way you can start thinking about your whole workforce is to look at who you got, who's doing work for your business, and make sure they're properly classified. That's something, again, inevitably you need legal input for one way or another. But be open and transparent about the fact that some people are employees and some people are contractors, and identify them and classify them correctly. And this is something that a company needs to do with all of the different business units involved, because I think it's common, what I believe Kim was describing, and tell me if I was describing this inaccurately, but that people in the business unit sometimes are establishing relationships with contingent workers or with agencies to provide the contingent workforce, and not involving the talent department. And so we need to reach out to all the different business units to say, where are you getting your workforce? Do I have all the information? Even if they're not going to fundamentally hand over management of those relationships to the talent department, you at least need to know about them. So there should be some kind of company commitment to having a department, probably talent or HR, that knows what all the worker relationships are, has access to the information, and will help if something's not working, and will review and make sure everyone's properly classified. I don't think it is currently transparent in a lot of organizations, and I think it's worth doing. Do you guys have anything you want to add at that moment?
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that, creating those positive relationships with line managers and the managers who are interested in these employees or these individuals, so that we do present a unified strategy, is critically important.
And I definitely agree that communicating to contractors as you would a normal employee is super important. I mean, they still want to know what's going on. As far as even just the company events, we do popsicle day, or we have an ice cream truck. Just because they're a contingent worker doesn't mean that they shouldn't be able to go down to the ice cream truck and things like that. So it's really important to treat them just like you would anyone else. Obviously, I think the time cap for us has been very important too, to make sure that we don't have co-employment issues for the future. So
I think the next step in having a unified workforce strategy is to think about how to apply the right rules to the right worker. That when you are setting up a new policy or setting up the onboarding procedures, pay attention to all these different laws that protect the employees, and consider whether or not they apply to the independent contractors. And then also consider whether, if you give them protections of certain laws, are you actually undermining their status as an independent contractor? So you have to both make sure you give them the protections, give the employees the protections they're entitled to, and create a workplace that feels okay to the independent contractors, but don't give the independent contractors so many rights and so many protections that from the outside, you are actually making a case that they are employees. Sometimes applying the right laws or rules or procedures to the right worker actually means applying one law to everybody. And I think that's really interesting. In so many cases, you got to treat the two categories differently. But there's some cases where that's obviously not true, and it might seem common sense, but it's nice to know the law supports you. One example is OSHA. OSHA is the law that guides us in making a safe workplace. It's all about workplace safety. Interestingly enough, it applies to employees. We as employers have obligations to keep the workplace safe for employees. But in addition, OSHA does apply to the independent contractors or non-employees or contingent workers that are working in the workplace. And of course, that seems like common sense, right? We're not gonna let companies invite in an independent contractor to work in our offices, but not keep them safe. OSHA, the law OSHA does allow for that. It says, yes, everybody, independent contractors and employees, are entitled to a safe workplace. Another example is the discrimination and harassment laws. Independent contractors don't have the same protections that employees do, and yet if you've got independent contractors working in your workplace every day or every once in a while alongside the employees, those independent contractors certainly need to be trained in how to avoid harassment or discrimination and how to abide by the rules for a respectful, safe workplace to make sure that employees aren't inadvertently harassed or discriminated against by the independent contractors because you kept the independent contractors out of the general training regimen that creates that non-harassing workplace. Again, there's no obvious way there's no rule you can always follow to decide whether independent contractors or contingent workers should be included or excluded from something. You really have to make a decision based on whatever law applies and whatever procedure you're trying to implement. And that gets down to the nitty-gritty of the practical questions that you're going to have to answer in making a unified strategy. And we've been discussing them all along. Who's going to get invited to the parties? Who's going to receive emails about business developments? Those are, if you're going to have a unified workforce strategy, you have to make intelligent decisions about those practical questions by considering the benefits or the drawbacks of including the contingent workers and not including them. But the nice thing is, in order to make sure that us HR and talent folks don't become obsolete, we are the ones best suited to answer those practical questions. What would you like to add, Kim and Aoife?
I think you covered it really nicely, Judy. I think sort of figuring those things out, and I think about things like, for example, we do an engagement survey of our employees, right? And we do that, and we use our email, and our email includes all of our temps, all of our interns, everybody as part of our email mailing list. And I had to really go through that list when I came to the engagement survey, because at that point, that was a situation in which I really wasn't interested in does my contractor or 1099 think they're appropriately paid or enjoying the benefits that they should be enjoying, right? So there are things that I think you also need to be mindful that really are dedicated and devoted to the employees, and you're interested in what they're thinking about versus perhaps the people that are in the building, and sort of monitoring when it's appropriate to exclude your contingent workforce in light of what you're doing for your employees. So I think being able to easily identify who's who is something that is critically important. And in, you know, even with using technology, I was struck by, as we're talking, you know, using, for example, we use ADP to pay our employees, and having different classifications within that system is challenging. It's not something that's easy to do because it is set up for a very traditional, this is your workforce, these are your employees, and you pay your employees in this way. But you know, as we talk about the world changing and how we look at people differently, I think there are things that also need to change along with it, and some of that is going to be quite interesting in terms of how quickly that kind of technology is going to catch up with us.
That's great. I'll chime in as well. So I think with Demandware, so we've grown 40% year over year for the last 3 years. I've been here almost 4 years. So it's pretty insane growth. And so with that, with things tightening down as we're, you know, trying to show profit, and you know, we are a global company. We're expanding globally. We just opened offices in Italy, or actually New York City, and Sydney. So with that, contingent workers are just the way of the future. So we need help at certain periods of the year. We are an online e-commerce platform. So the holiday season is when, you know, we are insane as far as work. And so that's when we need a lot of contingent workers. And so with that being said, I agree 100% as far as making sure you properly classify them so they're not getting the engagement surveys and the things that they really aren't relevant to them. But one of our core values at Demandware as well is transparency. And so, you know, today we had a big announcement of being acquired. And so everything's going to change, I'm sure. But, you know, all of our interns, all of our contingent workers were in there. It's just, you know, we do want them to know what's going on, but as far as things that relate to them. So, I mean, this will obviously affect them as well. So that was something that we did invite them to, but and the, you know, the weekly events and things like that. But as far as HR benefits, employment, things like that, you know, those are things that they just don't need to be a part of and that don't apply to them either. So we're very clear with our contingent workers up front that this is the length of your duration. Don't expect it to be longer than that. Sometimes it will extend, but it really won't ever extend past a year. And so again, we're a transparent company, and that's, you know, even pre-employment. So we're very honest with everyone as far as what we're able to do for them, and obviously a growing company as well. So if they did want a full-time employment here, you know, we'll do everything we can, especially if they're a hard worker and they prove themselves, to find a spot for them. So.
What I focus on at this point, I think, with my clients, and I think is important for us all to try, is take advantage of the opportunity to be creative here. That it is that we are sitting here with a hybrid workforce as a result of change. So the old ways of doing things are not always going to work, and it's worth coming up with new ones. It's worth coming up with novel strategies. It's worth taking seriously the need to protect the company and to minimize the risks of having a hybrid workforce by trying out new solutions. And the example, I'll go back to the computer example. I find that when the independent contractor is, for instance, working for the company on his or her own computer, you could have a policy that requires that person to do all the work for your company, maybe in a different login, or keep all of that work in separate folders. Or you can ask the independent contractor to agree that the company will get access to that computer if they need it for an audit or a lawsuit, or to access information, or to verify that the person's doing the work. It's a rocky, uncomfortable kind of a negotiation to have with an independent contractor, and hopefully you all have worked out that independent contractors are using company computers. But from what I'm seeing, that's not always possible. And so that's an example of one area where you can be a little creative and try to protect the company's interests while also respecting the person's status as an independent contractor. If there is technology available to answer questions, we welcome a couple questions, but also I'm looking at the time and noticing that we do probably only have 2 minutes left. And so for those of you who will be bowing out, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope it was helpful.
Well, it looks like that we covered all of the questions. So there were a couple that popped up, but they sort of disappeared as you hit on different topics. So I just wanted to thank everyone again for both joining us and the panelists for being here today, especially with some big news happening. So very, very exciting, and I'm glad that you were still able to join us. So thank you very much. If anyone missed any part of this, the session was recorded and we will post it shortly. But other than that, thank you very much, and hopefully you can come out and check out some Mass TLC events in person and appropriately timed phone call. Okay, well, have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.